Good morning to you.
Good morning.
A week after Easter. If I were to mention the names of certain disciples to you and ask you to write down the first word that comes to your mind, it's likely you'd come up with the same word. But if I were to mention the name of Judas, many of you would write that word down, betray. But maybe not all of them. If I were to mention the word Simon Peter, some of you might write down the word faith, but not all. If I were to mention the names of James and John, some of you would probably write down sons of thunder, but not all of you. But when I mention the word Thomas, there's a little question about what anybody would be writing down. The word would be doubt. Indeed, so closely have we associated Thomas with that word that we have coined the phrase describing him as doubting Thomas. We all say it. You might be interested to know that in the first three Gospels we're told absolutely nothing about Thomas, if you'll look in there. But it's in John's Gospel that he emerges as a distinct personality, but even then there's only 155 words about him, to get specific. There's not a lot about the disciple in the Bible, but there is one more description. When Jesus turned his face toward Jerusalem, the disciples thought there would be the certain death for all of them. And surprisingly, it was Thomas who said, "Let us go so that we may die with him." It's a pretty courageous statement. But we don't remember him for saying that. We also fail to point out that in the story of Thomas' doubt, we have the one place in all the Gospels where the divinity of Christ is bluntly and unequivocally stated. And it's interesting, is it not, that the story gives Thomas his infamous nickname in the same story that has Thomas making this earth-shattering confession of faith. And you look at the faith, at the confession, it's my Lord and my God. He doesn't say teacher, he doesn't say Lord, he doesn't say Messiah, but God. It's the only place where Jesus is called God without qualification of any kind. And it's uttered with conviction, as if Thomas was simply recognizing the fact that this is 2 + 2 = 4. And the sun's in the sky. You're my Lord and my God. These are certainly not words of a doubter. Excuse me. Carly Thompson Powell tells about a junior high school teacher who was telling her class about evolution and how the way everything was in the world was formed and proved that God doesn't exist. She said, "Look out the window. You don't see God, do you?" The kids shook their heads. "Look around you in this room. You can't see God, can you?" The kids shook their heads. Then the logical conclusion is that God doesn't exist, does he? She asked at last certain that the kids had been won over by her conversation. But one little girl in the back of the classroom said, "Miss Smith, just because we can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You know, we could do brain surgery to investigate the parts of your brain, and we could do a CAT scan and see the brain patterns in your head, but we couldn't prove that you had a single thought today. Does that mean that you haven't thought anything today? Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist." Seeing is believing, right? But just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Unfortunately, history has remembered him for his scene where the resurrected Christ made an appearance to the disciples in the home in Jerusalem. Thomas wasn't present, but he heard about the event, and he refused to believe. Maybe he's a forerunner of the modern day cynicism. Maybe the news simply sounded too good to be true. Thomas said, "Unless I feel the prints in his hands, I will not believe." And for Thomas, seeing is believing. I can't help but notice that Thomas has separated himself from the disciples and therefore in his solitude missed the resurrection appearance. And I think that John is suggesting to us that Christ appears most often within the community of believers that we call the church. And when we separate ourselves from the church, we take a chance on missing his unique presence. The Sunday after Easter is commonly known as Low Sunday. How many of you know that? Low Sunday. Exhausted by all the events of Holy Week, the emotional roller coaster ride of Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, No Name Saturday, Easter Sunday, the Sabbath. After Easter tends to be a bit muted. Plus, it's one of the lowest attendance days in church records. But for Thomas, Low Sunday became the highest moment of his life. The doubting disciple sees for himself the risen Lord. And despite his previous disclaimers, unless he see the marks of the nails, unless I put my hands in his side, Thomas spontaneously exclaims the encapsulation of the entire gospel. Upon encountering the risen Christ, Thomas's Low Sunday is my Lord and my God. In John's gospel, that first Sunday was filled not with rejoicing and relief among Jesus' disciples, but with confusion, confinement, and concern. Despite to the apostles, Mary Magdalene's prompt reporting of her experience of the risen Jesus at the tomb, those she tells don't seem to grasp the meaning of an empty tomb. Instead of running to see the tomb themselves or even going to search for this risen Jesus, Mary claims to have seen and spoken with. In John's text, the disciples keep the news quiet and themselves locked down throughout the day. And we find them still hunkered down in the residence where they celebrated the Passover. They've literally locked themselves in that upper room, locked up their hopes, locked up their own exposure, and locked up their dreams. And by specifically noting the lockdown status, John is able to both communicate the miserable state of the disciples and to highlight the miraculous entrance of Jesus into their midst. Later in today's text, the risen Jesus truly physically emphasizes his appearance. Here, his sudden, through locked door appearance points up the transhuman abilities he has. After rising from the tomb and teleporting into the locked safe house, Jesus' initial greeting to his disciples is almost comically mundane. Peace be with you. Shalom Aleichem. The most common casual greeting today would be, hi guys, how you doing? Only later, readers in John's Gospel might recall that Jesus had indeed promised his peace to his followers. And next, Jesus demonstrates that despite his drop-in appearance in their midst, he is in fact the physical being his disciples had known him and followed. The wounds in his hands testify to the crucifixion. The wounds in his side testify to the grievous torture he had gratuitously suffered at the hands of his accusers. A little boy growing up in a community where his father served as a Methodist minister was outside playing. He was doing all those little things little boys do. He was climbing trees. He was swinging on the swing set and jumping out. He was rolling around, playing on the ground with his dog. His mother calls him in for dinner, and all the family gathered at the table. His mother looked at him and said, young man, let's see your hands. You guys all know the routine, don't you? You women know the routine also. Rubbed his hands against his pants and held them out. How many times have I told you to wash your hands before you eat? When your hands are dirty, they have germs all over them, and you can get sick. After the blessing, I want you to march yourself right up to the bathroom and wash your hands. So everyone sits there at the table, their heads are bowed, and the father said the blessing. Then the little boy got up and headed out of the kitchen. He stopped and turned around, looked at his mother, and says, Jesus and germs, Jesus and germs. That's all I ever hear, Jesus and germs. And I've never seen either one of them. It's a humorous little story. But it does point out the fact that our hands can be an identifying character. According to the FBI, every one of us has a different set of fingerprints. Being a cop, I can tell you, I've never had two sets the same. And the same was for Jesus. On that first Easter, Peter and John gathered with the other disciples in the upper room to talk about the empty tomb and the possibility of the resurrection. As they were talking, Jesus came and stood among them, and they were frightened. But Jesus reassured them by showing them his hands and his feet. How often have disciples seen those hands of Jesus touching the blind eyes to make them see? How often have they seen his hands bless little children? How often have they seen him reach out with his hands and lift a cripple and say, walk? They saw the hands of Jesus and they knew that he was resurrected from the dead. John does not record any responses made by the disciples themselves in this first post-resurrection encounter with Christ. In this first meeting, Jesus does all the talking and does all the action. And not surprisingly, those most intentionally evangelical of the four Gospels, in John's narrative, Jesus' first message to disciples appears to be missional. But for John, those locked doors serve another purpose. Jesus' sudden appearance within the locked room suggested the unique power and presence of this resurrected body. Jesus' words to these disciples is a common enough Hebrew greeting, shalom aleichem, or peace be upon you. In the confines of that locked room, where Mary spread the news of Christ to her friends and followers, that held there all day, this greeting of peace is a reaffirming and restorative. Even though they did not go and find him, the risen Christ found them. That Jesus repeats this declaration of peace again in verse 26 and reemphasizes its significance, suggesting it's more of a greeting. It is, in fact, in faith, Jesus' promised gift to his followers, which is cited in several other passages. But according to John's narrative, someone misses that moment. Someone important to that story misses the miraculous mission-making moment. Thomas, who had previously been singled out by John in chapter 11, verse 16, and chapter 4, verse 5, is absent in this locked room when Jesus makes his appearance. In the second half of today's gospel text, the voice of Jesus' disciples are definitely heard. But the most outspoken vocalization is a voice of doubt. Those who had been safely locked away in the upper room when Jesus made his appearance now enthusiastically echoed Mary's testimony. We have seen the Lord. And ironically, it's Thomas, the one disciple who was not frozen by fear, the one disciple who had ventured out of the locked safe house and into the hostile surroundings, refused to accept the face value what both Mary Magdalene and the others now unanimously assert. But you need to note that Thomas does not dismiss the possibility of their good news is accurate. But he does insist that Jesus meet his criteria before he'll affirm his faith. And the failed logic of Thomas' demand is that it is only after the risen Lord and Messiah, the Son of God, openly bows to Thomas' own personal whims, he'll believe that Jesus wields the power to conquer death. Sometimes we do that in our thoughts. But when Thomas returns, he becomes the first missionizing moment of this new Christ body community. Despite the Holy Spirit-charged atmosphere within that room, despite the wondrous witness of all present testifying we have seen the Lord, a key member of the body remains unconvinced. He expressed his doubt with rude and graphic forcefulness. Thomas is declaring he must jab or thrust his fingers into the nail holes and pierce side before he will believe in a resurrected Christ. So we have a week later. 8 days passed. Although Jesus' disciples are still gathered in that first Sunday after Easter in the same room, there's no longer a scribe and fearful. Now the doors are now they're behind doors that are merely shut, not soundly locked, as we originally heard. So again, miraculously, Jesus stands within the midst of this gathered group. And again, he issues a greeting of peace be upon you. And once again, distribute the peace that only he can give to his ongoing body. Jesus turns and addresses Thomas. This time he specifically included the one who was absent and excluded him the previous week. So now we have Jesus in his presence offering Thomas the miracle of the resurrected self, the gift of his peace. Jesus' presence reveals to that doubting disciple evidence that even though he had not physically been present for Thomas' diatribe, Jesus knew exactly, had knowledge of all that had been said. And Thomas' faithlessness and the other disciples' failure to convince were both known to the resurrected Lord. He knows everything that's happened. And Jesus now invites Thomas to do exactly what he had demanded he must do in order to believe. To place his own hands in the tattoos of the torture, and the scars still born in the resurrected body. But more importantly, Jesus challenges Thomas to accept new reality that stands before him. Doubt no more. Trust me. Thomas turns out not to be the tough guy he originally presented himself as. Confronted with Jesus' personal presence and peace, his doubt dissolves and his knees bend. And instead of examining the wounds, he worships my Lord and my God. In John's text, one member of the body most doubtful becomes the first proclaimer of the resurrection truth. Jesus is my Lord and my God. Yet despite the greatness of Thomas' spiritual insight, Jesus' response challenges all disciples to yet another level of faithfulness. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have faith. The Thomas leap of faith from pouting and doubting, stewing and brooding to creating confession is impressive. But the faithlessness of those who only don't touch but also don't see is a faith that's most blessed and celebrated. Have you ever wished you could actually see Christ? Have you ever wished that? Ever wished to be able to touch him? To actually hear his words from his mouth? Are there times that you want to sit down with him and get his advice personally? Thomas wanted Jesus' physical appearance, but God's plan is wiser. He has not limited himself to one physical body. He wants to be present with you at all times. Even now, he is with you in the form of the Holy Spirit. You can talk to him. And you can find his words to you in the page of the Bible. And he can be as real to you right now as he was to Thomas. Jesus' response is a gentle chastisement as well as a challenge to the future faithful. The words recall John 4:48, yet Thomas was more than a gentle swat. It was not a reprimanding slap. Thomas' doubts were taken seriously and addressed directly by Christ. But the greater blessing avails to those whose faith can flourish without the physical world necessarily affirming the spiritual truth of their faith. Jesus' words seem to accept that this faith is what it is when not seen. It may require some time and effort on the part of the future disciples. For his blessing is directed toward those who come to believe. For some it may be the path that Thomas took. From great doubt to great faith. Jesus wasn't hard on Thomas when you read that passage for his doubts. Despite his skepticism, Thomas was still loyal to the believers and to Jesus himself. And some people need to doubt before they believe. If doubt leads to questions, questions lead to answers. And answers are accepted, then doubt has done good work. It's when doubt becomes stubborn. And stubbornness becomes a lifestyle. The doubt harms faith. When you doubt, don't stop there. Let your doubts deepen your faith as you continue to search for the answer. Jesus' resurrected body was unique. It was not the same kind of flesh and blood Lazarus had when he came back to life. Jesus' body was no longer subject to the same laws of nature as it had before death. He could appear in a locked room, yet he was not a ghost or an apparition. He wasn't disembodied spirit. Jesus' resurrection was literal and physical. Some people think they believe in Jesus if they could see a definite sign or miracle. But Jesus says we are blessed if we can believe without seeing. We all have the proof that we need in the words found in the Bible, and a testimony of his believers. A physical appearance would not make Jesus any more real to us now than what he already is. Mickey Enders writes, someone described Thomas's doubt as a seeking doubt. A doubt that wants not to continue to doubt, but to come to believe. Interesting statement. And Thomas makes it clear to all of us, there is more than one kind of doubt. There's that kind of doubt that does not want to believe, that reaches for arguments in order to deny the affirmation of faith. But there is also that seeking doubt. This is a person who earnestly wants to believe, but honestly admits that he or she struggles to understand. And this kind of doubt actually energizes and expands one's faith. Glenn Ludwig, in his Lenten and Easter sermon booklet, wrote about a pastor he heard tell a story about a miracle that happened in the life of a 15-year-old girl during a weekend retreat. Quiet, reserved, shy, brilliant and hollow, lifeless eyes searched for answers to gnawing questions that eroded her life and spirit and made her appear dark and despondent. But something happened. Her eyes became more restless and alert. She was searching and somehow knew that she was close to something, but she wasn't sure. And the group had spent that weekend on the theme discovery. And it talked about discovery of self, of others, of God. As a 15-year-old shared the pain of her older sister's recent suicide, the dam broke. And water like baptism washed a face that hadn't cried in a very long time. Later on that evening, the group did a Bible study around Luke 9, where Jesus asked the disciples, who do people say that I am? And later in that chapter, when Jesus lays out the conditions of discipleship, if you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. And for those who want to save their life, will lose it. Those who lose their life, for my sake, will save it. When a pastor asked the group what that sounded like, a commercial, a Sunday school class lesson, a parent laying down another rule for their child, the young girl with a tear-stained face responded, it sounds like something worth giving my life to. And the pastor said, I sat with Thomas that night in the form of a 15-year-old girl. And we shared some bread and wine in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ. Do you see that out of the struggle with honest doubt, a faith can be reborn and new life can begin? Some of you may remember the story of Dave Trevecchi. Remember him? Yeah. Former pitcher for San Francisco Giants. Dave's probably the most remembered for the gruesome footage of his arm breaking mid-pitch. In 1988, he noticed a lump growing on the left arm and decided to have it checked. After an MRI, they found that it was a fibroid tumor right at the base of the deltoid muscle in his pitching arm. They removed that tumor in 50% of the deltoid muscle and told him he'd never pitch again. Dave missed part of the 88 season and part of the 89 season. Determinedly, he returned, though, to the mound 10 months after surgery. On August the 10th, 1989, at Candlestick Park, he won the first game he pitched in a short-lived comeback against Cincinnati Reds, 4-3. He pitched 8 electrifying innings in that game. But 5 days later, just 5 days later, pitching in Montreal against the Expos, his arm snapped as he attempted to deliver a fastball to Tim Raines in the 6th inning. It was said to be the pitch heard around the world. As a deafening break could be heard clear up in the press box, and his arm let go. It was ugly to watch on TV. He recalls it was at that time he realized there was something happening in his life much bigger than baseball. Dravecky would eventually lose his left arm, his shoulder, and collarbone to cancer and to quell a recurrent staph infection in his arm that threatened his life. On top of his loss of promising career as a Major League Baseball player, the experience left Dravecky filled with many questions. And during his struggles, he received letters of encouragement from all over the country. Most of his letters were very encouraging. Some were looking for answers to life's questions. They seemed him keep his faith. They wanted to know how he had done it. But one day he received this letter. Dear Mr. Dravecky, if there is a God who cares so much about you, why did he allow you to have the surgery in the first place? I've lived 41 years in this old world and have yet to see any piece of genuine evidence that there is anything real about any of those religious beliefs you talk about. God certainly does not love me and has never done a single thing to express that love for me. I've had to fight for everything I got in my life. Nobody cares about what happens to me. I don't care what happens to anybody else either. Can't you see the truth that religion is nothing more than a crutch used by a lot of weaklings who can't face reality? That the church is nothing but a bunch of hypocrites who care nothing for each other and whose faith extends not to their actions or daily lives, but only just a bunch of empty phrases spouted off to impress others. Pretty nasty letter. Pretty cruel. How would you respond to that letter? Well, he sent a letter back to the man. He said he had faced his own doubts, and that faith wasn't easy. And he wrote, I'm convinced that there is a God. But no matter what happens to me, there is a purpose for it. And behind that purpose stands a loving, caring God. In 1991, on the 7th anniversary of San Diego Padres winning National League West title, Dave was honored before that game. Dave Dravecky had been on the mound for that one of the biggest moments in San Diego sports history. But on this night, the San Diego Padres fans and team honored Dave and his family. On that night, they honored a man who was a hero in baseball and a hero in life. Before a capacity crowd, Craig Lefferts, the Padres pitcher, said this: it is ironic that the things Dave was most known for, he lost. But through all that, the true Dave Dravecky showed that the man is of great courage and a man of unshakable faith in Jesus Christ. Frederick Booker, in his book Wishful Thinking, said, whether your faith is that there is a God or there is not a God, if you don't have any doubts, you're either kidding yourself or asleep. Doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving. Dravecky had come to know the same Lord who came back for Thomas. The same resurrected Jesus Christ who stood before all the disciples and said, peace be with you, Thomas. Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. We all have our doubts. Thomas, Dave Dravecky, the letter writer, none of us are exempt. But what Jesus says to you is, you will be blessed in the midst of those doubts. You believe.